What's the nature of your emergency?
Good morning, police, fire, military, and families. And to everybody who is listening in on the Tactical Living podcast, you've been listening to Patrick and I kind of chit-chatting a little bit because I was telling him that I was thinking about him last night. So thank you for sharing that with me. Patrick is a retired police sergeant. I had listened to another one of your interviews and you talked about that being like a super cush job. My husband is also a sergeant. And so I definitely think that that's true. So it's pretty cool that you got to retire out of that position. And you are also an author and the host of a podcast. Good morning. I am smiling, Rick. And we are doing a giveaway today. We have what do we have here? We have a waterproof Bluetooth speaker to whoever comments the most within the next 24 hours. Ooh. If you won last time, you can't win this time, but you can win next time. So if you guys have any questions, Patrick is in our group. You can go ahead and drop them now or down below, and then we'll get to them later. But Patrick, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, my name's Patrick O'Donnell. I was born on the south side of Chicago. Mom and dad are Irish immigrants, so I'm first generation American. We moved to Wisconsin when I was a freshman in high school, and that was a little bit of a culture shock, going from Chicago to a little town in rural Wisconsin. It was less than 10,000 people. We didn't even have a McDonald's. I'm just like, Mom, Dad, I'm a teenager, I'm like, what are you doing to me? Because that was like the mecca of your social life. It's like you go to McDonald's and hang out with, whoever. That was the thing. And yeah, it was a big culture shock. I had friends that were farmers. I had never been on a farm before. And these are like legit farms. And I'm just like, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. That part, because it's like, hey, we're gonna go bale hay today, and I'm just like, yes, can I come along? And it was him and three brothers, and these families, they produce as many offspring as possible because they're little farm hands. They're going to be the labor later on. That's just out of necessity. And his brothers are looking at me like, is he nuts? Why is he excited about baling hay? This is like drudgery. It's like 90 degrees and we're going to be out in the fields. And I'm like, this is the coolest stuff ever. I've never seen this kind of thing. So I had a lot of fun. I went to college and my degree was in sociology. My minor was criminal justice. I started actually as a music major. I was going to be a band director. And I was working full time while I was going to college, and I was trying to go to college full time. And, I was unloading trucks, in the morning, or I was getting ready to go unload trucks or whatever. And I'm with all these music people and it just didn't mesh. There was a lot of like little 1 or 2 credit classes. And I'm like, oh, please, I don't have time for this. I didn't have the patience. And I did an internship when I was a junior in college, and it was with the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department, and that got me hooked. I'm just like, this is the best job ever. You get paid. I'll pay you for this, just to experience it. This is so neat. I thought it was the bomb. So I graduated from there, worked. Now this is back in 1995 is when I first started, but for 6 years, I applied for different police jobs. I was on the waiting list for the city of Milwaukee Police Department for 4 years. Competition was super fierce to become a cop. So in between, to pay the bills, I sold cars. I was a restaurant manager. I bartended. I did all kinds of stuff. And then finally, I got on the job in 1995, had a great career, retired in 2020 after 25 years. And what you mentioned before was I spent 17 of the 25 as a sergeant on the street. And I'm like, this is the best job in the department. I don't want to promote any further. A lot of my friends did. And they're like, what are you doing, Pat? And I'm just like, are you kidding me? I'm never going to leave this job. This is the best job ever.
Yeah, that's when you get into the roughs of the politics. When you go up.
You do, but your job is to make your cops' lives better or as easy as possible. You're the buffer between the lieutenant and the captain and the boots on the ground that are actually doing the job, the cops.
You fell into my transition just now because I wanted to ask you, with such an extensive career, something that we always talk about is leadership. So what was some of the biggest kind of leadership takeaways that you took away from the job?
Some of the biggest ones that I took away was, and the way I learned them was, everybody's got a boss that they absolutely loved and thought was, fantastic and did such a good job. And then you had bosses that just sucked. And, that's one of the main reasons why I promoted was, it's like, if you can do it, I know I can do a better job than you. So that's kind of one of the things that really pushed me was like, I know I could help these guys better. I know I could do this better. So the lessons that I learned were from, the sergeants and the lieutenants and the captains that I worked for as more of a rookie cop. And I wanted to emulate, and, you find your own style after a little bit. Everybody's got their own style. It's like I had one sergeant that he could have been a stand-up comedian. The guy was so funny, but he was probably one of the best bosses I ever had. He was fair. You got to be fair. You got to be fair to everybody. But again, you have to look out for your cops. And as far as leadership goes, I'm a huge fan of Jocko Willink. I love his books. His podcast is great. And one thing that really stood out to me, and I didn't know it was happening until I heard somebody explain it, was like extreme ownership. And the way I see that is, I'll give you an example. I was in charge of the special cars. I transitioned to day shift towards the end of my career. I worked nights for 17 years. And I didn't want to be there. I was going through a rough divorce. And I wanted my kids 50-50. The only way I could do that was I had to go days. Before that, I was working 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. And I thought that was the best shift ever because we didn't really take that many assignments. We would if it started getting real busy, but it was mostly special cars that had, like direct patrol missions, etc. And here I am days, but they gave me some special cars. I'm like, great. And what happens, I don't know, I was off. And, it's 8:00 in the morning. My boss pulls me in the office and he says, hey, your guys did X, Y, and Z. Nothing egregious, nothing illegal, just something, it's like, hey, it popped up on the captain's radar. He's pissed off, yada, yada, yada. I said, well, I'll take care of it right now. So I walk into the captain's office and, throw him a salute. Good morning, sir. Said, yeah, O'Donnell, what can I do for you? And I said, yeah, I heard one of my guys, I forget what it was all about. He says, yeah, I'm really pissed at that. And I'm like, okay, be pissed at me. He says, what are you talking about? You were off. I said, no, I trained these guys. I'm responsible for these guys. So if anybody's going to be taking heat, if you're going to be chewing any ass, you chew my ass, and then I'll talk to my guys about it and see, where the deficiency is, see where they're coming from, and maybe we could resolve this.
Yeah, so it takes a lot of strength to be able to do that. And whether he did or not, I think that having that kind of capacity to take that ownership, extreme ownership, it might alleviate some of the pressure for other people. So I really like that example. And I listened to you talk about the fact that you retired during a time that I think, in terms of when you chose to retire, could have been one of the most difficult times. Just from what I have learned about a lot of officers and their transitioning from retirement. And so based on the fact that you have successfully retired, however, you did it during all things George Floyd, what were some of the struggles that you dealt with, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I knew when I raised my right hand, January 16 of 95, that I was pulling the plug, January 16 of 2020. 25 years to maximize your pension. That was my plan, is I'm leaving. So COVID was just a thing. It was starting out. George Floyd didn't start quite yet. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, maybe it was. I don't know. But I retired and I got just a massive dose of survivor guilt. I'm sitting in my recliner watching the news, and my guys are getting rocked and bottled. They're working 20-hour days, and I'm sitting in my recliner watching it, and when I should be there. So I felt so guilty. I couldn't sleep at night. I had a horrible, horrible time with this. So the beginning of my retirement from law enforcement was terrible because I felt like I should be doing that. And my wife is like, you've done this. This isn't Milwaukee's first riot. We've had plenty of them. We're literally parts of the city were on fire. And I was working, day shift. I was working 7 o'clock in the morning till, I don't know, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I did that for like 3 or 4 days straight. Just enough time to go home, take a nap, change your clothes, take a shower, and go back and do it all over again. And she said, you paid your dues. You've had all kinds of crazy stuff happen to you. It's time for somebody else to do it. And that was a very, very bitter pill to swallow.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a lot of support from her. And I really liked hearing you say that she made mention of the fact that like this isn't new, right?
Right.
I think I remember you saying that, like, and it's going to happen again, right? So like you're going to have to get over this feeling sooner or later. What kind of support, I'm sorry, how does support like that make an impact on somebody when they are in that transition of retiring?
It's huge. This is my second wife. God bless her. We're coming up on 10 years being married. And my previous wife was completely unsupportive of me. Mm-hmm. And that made my job even tougher. She had she was very competitive. She was just driven by competition. So as most cops know, if you go to a family function or a social function of some type, people are going to bring up the fact that you're a cop. Most of the time, you don't want to talk about it. But inevitably, somebody's like, "Hey, do you have a story?" They're gonna want to know about the job. People are fascinated with it, and I'd begrudgingly was like, "Yeah, this funny thing happened or whatever," and my ex would chime in right away, and she's like, "I've got a tough job too." She managed a kitchen, and I'm like, "I know you do, absolutely," but nobody wanted to hear about her day of tomatoes and cucumbers and this got burnt or whatever. And kitchen work is hard. I've done it. It's hard work. You're on your feet for I don't know how many hours. My hat is off to anybody that works in a restaurant because like I said, I've done it. But inevitably, people are going to circle around you. You kind of become popular. And she had a very, very hard time with that. I worked nights for 17 years. And she was completely unsupportive of me. It's like, hey, I got to take a nap. I lived on naps, especially when I worked late shift, midnight to 8. I did that for 13 years. And, it's like, yeah, I got to take a 2-hour nap before I go to work. I need this. I slept 4 hours today or 3 hours today, because anybody who's got kids, et cetera, in life doesn't care that you work midnight to 8. It's just the way it is. And she would always find some excuse for, no, I have to do this. You take care of that, blah, blah, blah. Or she'd be waking me up in the middle of the day for some nonsensical thing. And I'm like, why did you just do that? And she was just mean-spirited when it came to that. And that's one of the huge contributors why we broke up.
Yeah, that's really hard. I'm thinking about my husband just switched over to night shift, and it hasn't been easy. And I'm down there like tiptoeing and like putting my hand over my dog's face when it barks. We have one of these. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I can be upstairs and I press this button and then the dogs stop barking. It works pretty amazing.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. 1995 was when you started your career, and there is so much that changed. The transition in law enforcement, in the past 4 years alone has been crazy. So what are some of the biggest changes that you saw during your career?
Man, there was a lot of them. Technology wise, it was huge. When I first started, we hand wrote our reports, had carbon paper, and white out, green out, yellow out, whatever color report was. And like I said, we hand wrote everything. There were no computers in the squad cars. Our squads were just jalopies. I mean, we're a city of 600,000 people, and you're lucky if you got a car that had decent tires, decent brakes. In the summer, the air conditioning almost never worked. You're just baking in that thing. And it was pretty medieval, to tell you the truth. And we didn't have tasers, there was no body cameras, there was no squad cameras, none of that. And lo and behold, we actually did police work, and we actually did a very good job of it. You learn to adapt. And as time went on, we got better equipment. When I first started, we just transitioned to the Glock semi-automatics. Before that, everybody had wheel guns. I was still working with guys that had 357s, Ruger 357s. So just, equipment wise, we transitioned to the Glock. That was like a big deal to have a semi-automatic pistol. And we had the Remington 870 shotgun in every squad. That was like older than me, probably. I mean, they were really old. And then, as time went on, we got computers in the squads. We had all this different software to write our reports that worked maybe half the time, and our computers in the squads work maybe half the time. What people have to understand is, police departments work on these like shoestring budgets, and we always bought the cheapest of everything. And when you buy the cheapest of everything, guess what? You get the cheapest of everything. And, they're constantly breaking down all the malfunctions, et cetera, et cetera. So I saw a lot of change. Then we didn't have tasers when I first started. So people were getting tasers, and I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. I never got one. In a big department like that, not everybody is going to get one because you don't have a take-home taser. It stays in the sergeant's office X amount, and there's only X amount of cops. So that's the way that works. And then we started getting patrol rifles. We got Smith & Wesson patrol rifles, the M4s. So that was a nice little addition. So we got a little more sophisticated with our firepower. We still have the Remington 870 shotguns. I mean, it is a good weapon. I'm not going to say it isn't. But we transitioned from the Glocks to Smith & Wesson, M&Ps. Then we went to SIGs, and then we went back to Glock. So you're always changing. Everything is changing. And I went through, I think, 5 different chiefs. And it's always fun to watch. They all have their special way of doing whatever, and they have their own flow charts. And it's like, oh my God, this organization is so screwed up. I have to fix it. So they change everything around, give it different names, et cetera, but it's pretty much the same.
I feel very confident in my husband's abilities and his training as a police officer, but I could tell you that in the last 4 years, I have never felt that things were as high risk for being a police officer as they were. And I'm wondering what you think or what you maybe hope for the future of law enforcement.
Well, when I started, we called it the crack wars. A city of 600,000 people, we had close to 300 homicides and over 1,000 non-fatal shootings. Cops were getting hurt on the regular. It was a very, very dangerous time. But things kind of calmed down a little bit for the most part, not really. And, things started kicking back up again in 2020, obviously. There was zero respect for the police. It is a dangerous time for the cops. And what I see and what's absolutely frightening to me is cops are hesitating. They don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to get criminally charged for, they have half of a second to make this decision, no matter what it is. And now all of a sudden there's hesitation where I'm watching videos and stuff. It's like, no, you should have shot your gun right there and ended this situation. Instead, all of a sudden now cops have to be mental health specialists. And I'm like, no, yes, more training. I'm all for it. The more you're trained, the better off you are. Quality training, not BS training. And, that makes you a more rounded cop, but you have somebody that's going through whatever episode and it's completely off the rails. I don't care if you're Sigmund Freud, you're not going to talk this person down. You reach that certain point where it's like, okay, now you have to take some kind of action. And I can see where cops are very, very hesitant to take police action now. And on top of that, they don't even want to go hands-on with people anymore. Proactive policing is kind of a thing of the past. And the people who are suffering the most from that are the people who live in these challenged neighborhoods that most people wouldn't want to. They're the most poverty-stricken, the most god-awful places on earth. And they're the ones who are being affected the hardest by this.
Yeah, isn't it interesting too to see the variance between this newer generation of policing with the younger police officers? And And what I mean by that is, like, my husband has had working FTO taking new officers to Starbucks and then telling them, like, go talk to these people, just so that they have some kind of communication skills that are built up, because it's non-existent.
It's funny you mentioned that. I don't understand that. Their faces are buried in their phones. And, as an example, I've got kids, that have gone through college recently, and they're in college and they're finding dates on like dating apps. And I'm like, wait a second, you're like 22, 23 years old. You're in the best shape of your life. What happened to going to a party and just going up to a girl and start talking to her? Where's your game? Everything's like swipe left, swipe right, whatever. And I'm like, they lose this like sociability. And on top of that, I had young cops, and back when I was a younger cop, it was like, hey, you know what, we're going to go out and have a choir practice at, blah, blah, blah bar, or we're going to have a house party, etc. We're going to hang out. We're going to do something together. Now it's, yeah, see you tonight. They're not going to physically see each other. They're going to be online playing video games. And I'm like, really? That's how you guys socialize now? And like you said, they don't understand and they can't comprehend the social interaction of being face to face with somebody. And we have whitewashed. You've heard of helicopter parents. Yeah. Well, now there's snowplow parents, where they take every obstacle out of their kids' way. I mean, they're just like, mom is leading the charge. Anything that might affect, Junior, he or she doesn't have to deal with it.
And then they're like 25, 30 years old, still living at home. No offense if your kids do, but to me, I just wasn't raised that way.
Well, I wasn't either, but the way it translates to police work is you have a lot of keyboard warriors who talk, like a big game on whatever social media platform, going back and forth or what have you. But once it's 2:00 in the morning and you have the drunk screaming in your face, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle conflict. They don't know how to handle bad times. They just fold. It's really sad.
Yeah, something that they definitely do have right is their ability. I mean, sometimes too right is their ability to say, this is too emotionally overwhelming, right? Like, we talk about the PTSD stigma in law enforcement. And I also am like a big proponent of people educating themselves on the fact that, like, that has gone away. There's no longer a stigma associated to this, because there's so many programs available. It's become so readily understood that this problem exists in law enforcement that we don't have that stigma anymore when it comes to law enforcement mental health. And I think a lot of that transition had to do with this younger generation of police officers kind of paving the path and making it okay to like talk about your feelings or to admit when there's something wrong.
Yeah, I agree, but there's a time and a place for that.
Totally.
When you're in the middle of something, that you need, to be 100% head on a swivel, this could go south very, very quickly. This is not time to start talking about our feelings. If you want to, debrief later or decompress, fine, sounds good. We can do it then. But what I have seen is they have a very, very hard time dealing with conflict and conflict resolution.
Yeah. Good morning, Jerry. We only have about 5 minutes here, Patrick. So I want to transition into understanding how you came to start writing books.
The way it happened was I had no idea I was going to do this. So a couple of years before I retired, I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, now what? Like I said before, I knew, I would retire January 16, 2020. So I had a long list of things I didn't want to do. And I didn't want to be a cop anymore. I loved the job. It was the best career possible, but it's a young guy's game. 55-year-old guys shouldn't be pushing squad cars around for 8 hours a day. No, that's not at all. So I'm a huge fan of the saying, dig the well before you're thirsty. So I tried out some different things. And like I told you before, I used to sell cars way back when, before I was a cop. And I always help people, friends and relatives, hey, I'm going to go buy a car. Could you come with? Or they'd call me from the dealership. Hey, the salesman's saying this. What does that really mean? That kind of thing. So somebody is like, you should write a book about that. And I'm like, okay. So I did it under a pen name because I didn't want my captain knowing that I was doing it, because any off-duty employment. You had to like fill out all this paperwork and have it approved by the chief. And I'm like, no, this would take forever and he wouldn't even understand it. So I'm like, absolutely not. So I just did it on the down low, put it up on Amazon, and it actually sold. It didn't sell 1 million copies, but I was impressed that strangers were paying me money for this. And I'm like, wow. So it sparked something in me. I'm like, that's kind of cool. So I wrote a few more books that had nothing to do with police work. I go to these different conferences, writers' conferences. Inevitably, people are going to be like, oh, you're that cop guy, right? And I'm like, I'm not wearing a t-shirt or have a sandwich board, and they're very respectful. It's like, hey, would you need a warrant for this? Would this really happen? Blah, blah, blah. And somebody who knows a lot more than I do about this stuff is like, you should write some books for authors about police work, how to get their police, the police procedural stuff correct. And I'm like, okay, I did. And it's called Cops and Writers. It was 2 books and they sold very well. And to promote those books, I started a podcast, the Cops and Writers podcast. And that was just to promote the books. And then before I know it, I'm like, boom, it's growing legs and it's exploding. I'm like, well, that's cool. And then I started a Facebook group and I've got 7,500 people in there, literally from all over the world. And it's a combination of different law enforcement from literally all over the world and writers that just have like police questions. So I started this little cottage industry like out of nowhere. I never expected any of this. And now I'm writing fiction and that's going really well.
Yeah, being open is far after the fact in most situations, head on a swivel and handle business. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I think that's so cool to have an environment like that you've created, especially when it came out of nowhere. But the most important thing is that you're there to solve a problem that a lot of people have. And at the beginning, you and I were talking about the fact that a lot of officers, especially when they retire, do transition into publishing books. So I think it's really cool that you were able to do that, but then also have an environment to where you're able to support people.
Yeah, I started like a little community, and I'm a huge. Pat Flynn is this like marketing guru, and he's this big fan of superfans. Yeah, and I think he even wrote a book called Superfans. But I'd much rather have 1,000, 10,000 would be great. 1,000 people or 10,000 people that are your super fan. They'll buy whatever you put out. They love you because you give them so much free stuff. Lots of free content, advice, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes time to ask for something, they don't blink. I'd much rather have that than 1 million come see, come saw kind of like fans.
Yeah, that comes from authenticity, which I can definitely tell that you have. So how can people get a hold of you, get those books, and listen to your podcast?
All the books are on Amazon. The latest is The Good Collar, a nice police vigilante. I have the police chaplain being Dexter, so I had a ton of fun writing that one. But all my books are on Amazon. Copsandwriters.com is my website, and then the Facebook group and the podcast are both Cops and Writers.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you have any more questions, drop them down below, and then we'll make sure to tag Patrick. And then Patrick, thank you so much for hanging out with us this morning.
Thank you so much.